Oop asks AITA for telling my mom I don't care that her father was in the Holocaust. I am not the oop. Do not harass them or brigade their post. CW. Holocaust. Verbal abuse. Alcoholism. Less than. Post 1. April 26, 2023. My grandfather David was born in 1927. He was Roma, and by the time he was 17 he already had one son, Levi. His wife was pregnant when she got captured, but my grandfather managed to escape with Levi. By 1950, my grandfather and Levi immigrated to Canada, where he completely Canadianized them down to changing names and everything to blend in. My grandfather and my uncle have had issues my entire life, and it's stretched all the way back to when they first moved. By the time my uncle was 16, he actually left and moved all the way to Toronto. In 1976, my grandfather married my grandmother Mary, who was born in 1946. They met because her dad was a Holocaust survivor and a friend of my grandfather. My mom Anna was born 10 years later, and I was born when my mom was 20. Throughout my entire life, my grandfather has been the worst possible person. He's never hit anybody, but he's yelled so much. Always swore. Broke dishes. Even punched a hole in a wall once when he was arguing with my dad. He'd call me bastard cause my mom and dad weren't married when they had me, and always insulted my dad. The worst of it though is that he always drank, and whenever he would drink he would rant to my mom about how Levi was so much better than her and how he wished he'd had the baby that died with his first wife instead. But my mom loved him and just said none of us understood him. He died 2 months earlier, and it was a slow decline, but I guess he knew he was going because a few days before he went, he had their last talk when my mom and I visited in the hospital. He told my mom how much he loved her, how she was the only good thing in his life, and how her being happy made his life worth it. The last thing he said to me was he'd see me in the next life. After he died, my uncle came into our lives, and even though he looks so much like my grandfather, he's so different. He's happy, doesn't drink, and it's honestly like he feels like what a grandfather should be. Because he got married late, I finally have cousins my age. The only thing he doesn't do is talk about my grandfather to anyone except mom. Last night, we were all over and my mom brought up my grandfather. She started sharing her favorite memories of him because she misses him. She asked me and I honestly don't have any, and that started an argument between us because she said he only acted how he did because of what he went through. I yelled at her that I don't have any good memories and I don't care that he was in the Holocaust, because he was always a jerk to us. That made my mom cry and leave, and my uncle told me that he's felt how I do his entire life, but I can't let it hurt my mom. Was I the asshole? Comments. A comment which really seemed to affect the oop here. Oh boy. A gentle YTA. I completely understand your anger with your grandfather. However, he deserves a bit of understanding, forgiveness. There were no options for mental health care for him to deal with his trauma from not only the war, but from losing his wife and child in such a god-awful way. Even if it were available, it's unlikely the Roma would have been offered help due to any of the ugly reasons you can think of. Yes, he should have not taken out his trauma on those closest to him. But even talking about your trauma was not supported back then. And further, he gave up his identity and heritage to be safe in a foreign country. Can you even imagine how alone, angry, helpless and hopeless he was? Drinking seems to have been his coping mechanism. Again, the trauma he inflicted on his family is not excusable. However, damaged people hurt people. Your poor mom just wanted the love he denied her until the end. You bore witness to his cruelty toward her. Your anger is multiplied due to your love and protectiveness of her. But she is still the child in their relationship, and she is desperate to find any examples in her life to prove her dad loved her. His last-minute confession of love for her is a pretty empty statement without any memories to back it up. Let your mom talk without condemning him. You don't have to agree or feel pressured to share any memories. But please respect that she is trying to come to terms with the difference with who her father was. And who, in hindsight, he may have wanted to be. I would imagine she also struggling to find her own heritage and history in all of this. You are not an ass for being angry, it's warranted. I recommend researching and reading about the experiences of the children, grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Even more importantly, read about the experiences of Roma survivors. I think it may be eye-opening for you with similarities to the relationship with your own grandfather. A side note, I found the graphic novel Mouse to be a valuable tool with understanding the adult-child relationships involving the Holocaust. Update post. May 10, 2023. Pretty much what happened after is my dad came home the day after and he got really upset with me because my mom was inconsolable. He told me about how we can't judge my grandfather like we could somebody else who acted like him, who hadn't gone through what he'd been through. He told me how my grandfather had never said a nice thing about him, but he still loved him because he wouldn't have had my mom without him needing to survive. He told me that I need to see the good that comes from everything. I didn't really know what to say, but Uncle Levi was still over, so he talked to me and Mom. He told me how relatives who survived the war or were living in different countries always talked about my grandfather like a different person than he knew. Like he loved motorcycles, wanted to be a mechanic and wanted to see the pyramids and was always doing things to make his first wife happy. But Levi told me that he really only remembers my grandfather from when they moved to a city called Stanislav. He told me that he can barely speak the Sinte language because he remembers how much my grandfather pushed for them to assimilate and learn Ukrainian even though he was little, but they faced a lot of discrimination there too. According to him, that's what really broke my grandfather, because it was like they still hate us even after what they did to us. So when they moved to Canada was when he really changed, and Levi said he always regrets leaving because it gave him issues that made him put his own life on hold. To the point where he only had kids because somehow he married a woman in her 40s who was able to. It seemed like he was joking about that. He said that my grandfather acted that way because he thought it was better to push people away so that when he was gone, people wouldn't miss him like the way he missed his own parents and first wife. My mom then tried to remind me of things that my grandfather did for me. Like he'd always go and buy me X-Men comics and movies because Magneto was the only real superhero. And how he'd always drive me to school. How he'd use his pension to buy me things. And I had honestly forgotten or just stopped thinking about a lot of that. She insisted that he did love me even if he didn't show it. I don't really know what to feel, but I didn't want to make my mom sad, and maybe Uncle Levi is right about why he was so mean, and maybe my dad is right about there being good in everything. So I said sorry, and I told my mom that I won't act like that again. She hugged me and gave me a lot of kisses on the forehead, so I think we're cool now because she's been happier these last 2 weeks. And I'm posting because I told my mom I posted here, and she told me that I needed to make a second one so people understood what happened. She knows about AITA because she listens to Reddit posts on TikTok. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how generational trauma looks. It's something that underscores how deeply evil the Holocaust was and how that hasn't just gone away. One of the hardest things for humans to grasp is that two things can be true. This is above Reddit pay grade. What the granddad went through is unimaginable. And it's understandable that he became like that. Too much grief and trauma, and untreated at that. But at the same time, That doesn't mean Oop's experience is invalid. He didn't have many good memories of his grandpa. It's not okay to tell him off and force him to change his feelings either. It's tragic all around. The switch from mean jerk to "I love you all so much" people go through on their deathbed is wild. Absolutely teared up when Oop mentions grandpa would buy him comics, take him to movies related to Magneto, a Roma Holocaust survivor. Specifically, that feels like such a sharp look into what he was thinking, feeling, but not able to express. ETA. He's a Jewish Holocaust survivor. But Marvel did briefly confirm he was a Roma survivor before walking that back. Either way, he's a Holocaust survivor with Roma children. Whoa Nelly, that's a lot to unpack and digest. I don't think it is bad his mom grief what could have been. That deathbed confession may have been the catalyst for OOP's mom to forgive all her dad's wrongdoings. As for OOP's, he is also entitled to remember grandpa as he wants to. Grief is not a size-fits-all, but it is a process we must go through when we lost someone close to us. This was heavy. People are complicated, especially those who have lived through horrible things. I hope Oop can remember all the sides of his grandfather. Yikes. I hate this. For the first 2 decades of my life, if I ever hinted that I was unhappy with my home life or had problems with my parents, people would tell me that they had a rough upbringing. And this made me feel like I had to stay silent no matter what happened. But that always made me so mad. Like, do you not think that I could have had a difficult upbringing? 2. Is our suffering a competition where only the person who has suffered the most is allowed to say so? Does having bad parents give someone carte blanche to be bad parents? I think that people who want to rug sweep the actions of older generations who are earlier links in the chain of generation trauma don't understand that these things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can have gone through incredibly traumatic things, but they can also be highly abusive people. And while their trauma may explain why they act the way that they do, it never justifies it. In the paraphrased words of bell hooks, love cannot exist in an environment where someone actively perpetuates harm. They can perform acts of caring, but that doesn't mean that they are acts of love. I hope this whole family at some point pursues therapy. Lots and lots of therapy. As a First Nations person in Canada, I can understand the grandfather's behavior. Alcoholism, abuse, drugs, anger. He is a product of what he went through. It's not an excuse to stay that way, but it's not like there was tons of help available to help the grandfather cope. My dad had a horrible childhood. Beaten by his dad like he was a grown man. His dad was a brutal drunk. Then day school, racism, being black and NDN. My dad turned to drugs. He wasn't an angry person to me, but it made it so he was never in my life. I hated him. As I got older, I developed more of an understand and empathy. If I hadn't had a mother who was there for me, the family that I had, I probably would have ended up the same way. I don't agree with the sentiment that Oop was wrong to say they had no good memories. If they don't have any, then that's that. Sucks sometimes, but just because you see the good in a horrible person doesn't mean anyone else is obligated to. I have so much sympathy for this family. Oop simply didn't have a good relationship with their grandfather. Their grandfather was not a pleasant person to be around. And so Oop has very few memories that could be considered positive. And yet, the grandpa survived basically the worst thing that could happen to a human. Lost his family. And still faced discrimination. Even today, the way some people treat the Roma people is appalling. I've seen some pretty vile things said on Reddit alone that proves how bad it can get. And beyond that, it was very hard to get mental health care for that sort of thing. And even harder to work past the stigma to accept that you need mental health care. He had a very understandable reason for being the way he was. But it also hurt people around him.
Frown.
I'm gonna be honest, at some point you are responsible for your own behavior. I think they put WAAAY too much on this poor kid. I don't see anyone mentioning how he was pressured to give an answer. Or how his mother was upset for weeks. He is not responsible for his mother's emotional state. He didn't say anything bad enough for her to be upset for weeks. Oop, father. He never said anything nice to be. We had so many arguments and he treated me like trash, but I love him. Me. Yeah, okay. Nice way to invalidate your son's feelings. Let's talk about dad's feelings instead. Oop shouldn't have to be okay with how their grandpa treated those around him for any reason. Cutting someone some slack is for them doing something outside the norm. Not constant behavior. Yes. Grandpa went through more than anyone should have to. No, that doesn't make it okay still. Op is NTA. We can feel empathy for the trauma. But it is absolutely not an excuse for the behavior. Mom can reminisce as much as she likes, but she cannot dictate how anyone else feels about her. Father, and if she tries to force her child to talk about them, she risks damaging their relationship forever. Maybe I'm an asshole, but there's no excuse for traumatizing others just because you yourself are traumatized. He could have gone through hell and back. It doesn't change the fact that he was abusive. Oop is not ta at all. Not even a gentle one. This kind of reminds me of how Sir Patrick Stewart used to be so angry with and still afraid of his father for abusing his mother, his siblings, and himself. Even long after his father's death, he has been very vocal on the need for better help for women and children fleeing domestic violence, and more consequences for the perpetrators. Then later in life he did some digging on the experiences his father had during World War II and how his father was suffering from PTSD, and he had a new empathy for the mental anguish his father was going through. And though none of the family deserved what the husband and father put them through, he began to understand that hurt people hurt people. He now campaigns for not only better services for people fleeing domestic violence, but also PTSD awareness and greater access to mental health services. It's very sad that the grandfather had all the joy snuffed out of him and he had to grind through survival daily in what probably felt like to him a horrific alternate universe. In his real life he was supposed to be raising Levi with his first wife and meet his new baby. So everything that came after that diverged so sharply from what his expectations of life were that he couldn't cope in a healthy way. He never felt safe enough to process his grief, and he was running away in some form for the rest of his life. It's all so very sad.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic AITA is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.